I think we're live.
Hmm.
Does it say live? Oh, it is. Okay. Sorry, it doesn't say it on my end, but welcome everybody to our live stream. We do candidate live streams with the New Jersey Libertarian Party every Thursday at 6:30. I realize it is not Thursday, it's Friday, but we had to postpone yesterday's live stream until today. But normally we go live with all the candidates Thursdays at 6:30. Today it's just Vic and I. So if you have any questions for us, please put them in the chat. Um, Vic and I are also live on TikTok. So if you prefer that platform, we're also simultaneously live there. And sometimes it's easier to ask us questions on TikTok rather than the Facebook or Twitter live. We're live on like 8 different platforms. So if you have a question for us, you will find a platform that we're on that you can ask. So how are you doing today, Vic?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's Friday, so that's always a good day of the week.
Yeah.
How about
So,
you?
so I'm doing good. Um, Resting my foot from my injury, but I'm doing okay. So there's some news about ballot access that I did want to discuss with you. Is Lily? I don't want to pronounce her last name. You don't know how to pronounce her last name?
It's been
Benavides.
yeah, Benavides.
Lily Benavides was the Green Party candidate, gubernatorial candidate, replacing the candidate that had dropped out because of health issues. Were given a new date and a new threshold of signatures to gather, and because of the short time frame, I'm assuming they hired somebody, which is very very common practice in political campaigns, to hire somebody to gather signatures for you. Especially if there's thousands to gather in a short period of time. They hired somebody out of state. Her signatures were challenged, and the judge ruled that all the signatures that paid petitioner had gathered were invalid because of the statute in New Jersey, which exists in most states, that a petitioner has to be uh, able to be registered to vote in the state of New Jersey. Now, this has come up in the past where a paid petitioner or whatever was collecting signatures. They had an out of state license, and it was ruled in the past that simply being, oh, Vic disappeared, simply being out of state doesn't necessarily mean that petitioning then becomes illegal, at least as long as you're able, he's back, as long as you're able to be registered to vote. So usually means you're over 18 is basically the statute. But this judge ruled against that precedent and ruled that those signatures were invalid, which I think was a poor ruling. And I think that they should fight it. But what are your thoughts on the judge's ruling?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I do know that. I mean, first of all, it's very unfortunate. I think that if one believes in democracy, one should support having more options. So I definitely believe that there should be as many candidates running as possible. Of course, the state made it more difficult to get on the ballot for anyone who's not a Republican or a Democrat, unfortunately. And I just don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. Now, the justification for the legislation was that, well, that in other states it's more, it's a lot more challenging to get on the ballot. But why is that a good thing? I mean, isn't democracy where you have more options to choose from? Isn't that something that one should support? I mean, we're not supposed to live on, under the type of government where people have no options. Certainly, when it comes to voting, people should have options, and I would argue that people should have as many options as possible. I mean, if somebody wants to run, they shouldn't be prohibited from running just because there's some people who think that, well, you're not a worthy candidate. I mean, who even is supposed to decide that, right? I mean, that's highly subjective. So. No, I totally disagree with the decision. I mean, the number of signatures was raised from 800 to 2,000, and the short amount of time that was given to place Lula Benavides on the ballot, that they were giving it's really an unfortunate situation because the candidate that was the nominee dropped out, so they only had a limited amount of time to collect signatures. I disagree with the decision because, of course, in the past, Lana, as you have mentioned, people, it was allowed to get out-of-state petitioners. I mean, that's something. I mean, I heard, I know specifically that is something that is allowed. And the idea that the person who is running for, rather the idea that the petitioner is supposed to be a registered voter in New Jersey, well, that's just not the case. I mean, petitioners who are out of state are allowed to collect signatures. So I'm not sure what is the reasoning behind that decision. The idea is that the petitioner who is out of state, in theory, would be able to register to vote by the time of the election. That is my understanding. It's because otherwise, then that would mean that paid petitioners out of state are not allowed, and that's just not the case. They are allowed. That's the whole point. So
and just for the audience, like I said before, paying petitioners to collect signatures for candidates is something everyone does, and they do it all over the country. It's very, very commonplace. And, as the statute says, the circulator has to be eligible to vote in the state of New Jersey. So that means eligible to be a resident of New Jersey and eligible to be able to register to vote, meaning you're over the age of 18. But it doesn't mean that you have to be registered to vote. And that distinction is very important, especially in cases like this, because the paid petitioner they had was eligible to live in New Jersey and be registered to vote, even if he wasn't, but he was eligible. That's important. And I would be saying this whether
just quickly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. You're absolutely right. So the idea, of course, is that the petitioner isn't. It's not the petitioner is not. A registered voter, but the petitioner is eligible, which means that basically that a paid petitioner could theoretically, move into the state and register to vote before the election. And that is certainly something that is true for, I would say probably for most out-of-state petitioners, unless they're not even eligible to be voters in their own respective states, which is not the case. Which is not the case with the with the petitioners in question, because all of them are registered voters in the respective states. And the idea of that law is that you could, in theory, come to New Jersey, and then, of course, register to vote, move into New Jersey and register to vote before the election, right? But by the time whatever the deadline is to get registered to vote in New Jersey. So, yeah, I think that ruling is, I don't agree with the ruling. I do hope they challenge it, because this is not, it's just not what the law is. The law doesn't say that if you're a paid petitioner from out of state that you have to be a registered voter. That's not what the law says. It only says you have to be eligible, which means that in theory, like I said before, you would be allowed to move into New Jersey before the election, register to vote, and that's it. So. Yeah, thank you.
And it's really interesting because if you've never run for office before, there is a process to turning in your signatures. You don't just hand a bunch of pieces of paper to the clerk or whoever's taking them. They actually go through all of them, and they actually confirm who the circulator was. And in times that we have used people that were out of state in the past for candidates, when the person who circulated that petition was out of state, they scan their driver's license into record. So that alone should be enough to show that out-of-state petitioners are allowed to circulate a petition. Like we've had many candidates that had, volunteers that were just over the border, PA, New York, and just want to help. We had a few volunteers this year from that came down from New York and collected signatures, and they were out of state. You just have to scan their license, and that's it. So because they need to confirm that you're over 18 and that you're a U.S. citizen, because that makes you eligible to register to vote in New Jersey and live here. And I would be saying this whether the person was a socialist candidate or a communist candidate or a Republican or a Democrat, because the issue is not whether I agree with that candidate's positions or the party, because, if I agreed with the Green Party, I would be a Green Party member and Green Party candidate, but I'm not. But the reason why I feel so strongly about this is, one, ballot access affects everyone, not just candidates. Of course, it affects us directly because we're candidates, but it affects everyone who is at all involved in the political process or even votes, because when they make ballot access difficult on purpose so that you don't have options on your ballot, you have less options. And so you have to pick between two evils or three evils or whatever. In this case, it's usually two evils, a rock and a hard place. And people are sick of that. And I think that's why they're pushing so hard this year and even last year, beginning last year and moving into the future. They're going to be pushing harder, is because people are tired of the candidates that the two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are pumping out. They're disillusioned. They have lost faith in the two parties because they just keep making promises that they can't keep. And they want to hear from someone fresh. They want something new. They want other options. And I think the two parties know that. And in New Jersey, if you don't know, if you're not from New Jersey, the Democratic Party basically has a stranglehold on the state. The entire state is basically blue, except for my area, which is pretty much Republican. And so when the Democrats see that any outsider is going to gain any sort of popularity, especially since their candidate this year isn't very popular and she's not polling very well. To be fair, the Republican candidate is also not very popular because, again, people want to hear from someone new. They're going to play dirty like that. Aside from what they did to Lily earlier this year, in the middle of people collecting signatures, and that includes the two parties. The state assembly passed a bill, S3994, if you want to look it up, which raises the signature threshold for statewide candidates. For example, Vic, instead of collecting a minimum of 800 signatures, which is, not that hard to collect, they raised it to 2,000, again, to be enacted retroactively, meaning not next year, which is usually how bills are passed. Like, there's some time that has to go by before they're enacted, but it went into effect retroactively. So Vic had to collect 2,000 signatures kind of last minute. And they do that on purpose so that it makes it difficult for third parties or independent candidates that don't have the same resources, don't have the volunteer power, or people who aren't being endorsed by any party at all, and are just running on their own time and their own money. They won't make it on the ballot, basically, because they don't want you to have options. And I think that's something that people need to actually look out for in their own states, is how hard are the Democrats and Republicans, or whoever is, majority in your state, making it for other candidates to get on the ballot, because that's proof whether they actually care about their communities and about, the democratic process or not. Did we lose you, Vic? I think we lost Vic. So another reason why this is important. Oh, your mic's off, Vic.
How about that? No.
Go ahead.
No. I totally agree with that. I think the issue is generally that. The big issue is that certainly, it is about choices, and I think that it's not just. I just want to add that I don't think that this is just about, the not wanting people to have other options. I think it's also about the idea that I think the polarization has reached also a level where the desire to have power is greater than anything else, and so they view the people who are outside of the two-party system more as a threat than it would be in the past, because I think that also the level of polarization has increased to a point where I think there's more of this belief that if the other side wins, quote unquote, then it will be the end of the world. And I think because the polarization is heightened in and of itself, the idea is that they don't want anyone to sort of get in the way of their party, winning the elections. And so they also, I think you mentioned this before as well, that they trained their some of their supporters to believe that pretty much that anyone who is not a Republican or Democrat is just a threat, because they're just going to let the other side win. And of course, that's not really true when it comes to us and it comes to others, because people who support people outside of the two-party system are already not happy with the major with the Republicans and Democrats, and therefore they're not really interested in supporting them in the first place, which is why they're not they're not Republicans or Democrats. And I think that's something they absolutely fail to understand. The reason why people vote for people who are not Republicans or Democrats because they don't like Republicans and Democrats. If they did, they would be supporting them in the first place. But that is, I think that concept is lost on the some of those partisans who believe basically that candidates are entitled to votes. that's why they try to make their supporters believe that, well, if you're not one, you have to be the other, and if you're not a Republican, you have to be a Democrat, and absent someone who, absent an independent candidate or somebody who's running as a Libertarian or Green or whatever, that person would be choosing one or the other, which is not the reality, and you can see it based on exit polls and all the evidence. But they don't care about the reality. They just, they try to convince their supporters of something that is just not true. So that's all I like to say.
Yeah, and if you're just joining us, feel free to leave a comment or a question in the comments, and we'll answer it when we can. But to add to what you're saying, yes, they train people to believe that you have to pick between the Democrats and Republicans. As candidates, we hear it all the time. Yeah, I'm a Libertarian, or I agree with everything you're saying, but we can't let the Democrats win. At least that's what I hear in my area, because I live in a very Republican area. Or, I like what you're saying, but what if the Republicans win? We can't have them win. And my response is always the same, that candidates are not entitled to votes, and your vote is a representation of your voice and who you actually support and what policies you actually support. That's what a vote does. So if enough people actually vote how they feel of the candidate that they actually support, it will change the course of politics moving forward. It will force the other candidates to change their policies and actually listen to the voters that they're losing, or a positive outcome, which is a candidate that that's other than the Republican or Democrat is going to win, and then that will also change the course of history, really. Democrats vote against Republicans, Republicans vote against Democrats, Libertarians vote for Libertarians. I think I said that wrong, but I agree that as Vic said, it's so polarized that people aren't voting for people anymore. They're just voting against the other guy, like anyone but Trump or anyone but Kamala or whatever we heard last year during the presidential election. And that's why I always encourage people, even if it's not for me, even if it's not for Vic or the Libertarian, even if it's not for the person that I want you to vote for, always vote your conscience. That is what you should be doing. Vote for the person that you actually support, that you actually want to see representing you in your assembly or Congress.
Right, absolutely. And if I could just add as well, and this is actually enjoyable. There was a couple of years ago, there was a person who stopped by the booth, and he said that, he was I think he was supporting one of the major parties. Like, well, you guys are Republicans, and then the next thing he was saying that you're Democrats, and then the candidate that was running was a Libertarian. So I think you're confused. You just said we're Republicans. Then you said that you're actually Democrats, you're not Republicans. So, what does that even mean? And this is I think this is what makes it certainly confusing, because, of course, I think, Lana, you mentioned this in previous time that some of the ideas, they can sort of overlap with maybe a couple of the, some ideas, maybe that sound like Republican or Democrat or Green or, a bunch of others. But the idea, of course, is that, and what I just wanted to add on top of that, Lana, you're absolutely right, is that is not intentional. That is not, we believe in individual liberty. So, of course, that means that in few cases that, someone who is a Republican may find something that they agree on, or someone who's a Democrat might find something that they agree on, but this is just totally coincidental. And it's not like, the libertarian philosophy is about, well, we'll just take a little bit from here and we'll take a little bit of here and a small amount from here. That's not how it works. We believe in individual liberty. And to the extent that anyone agrees with us on any of those issues, that's totally coincidental, right? During the Iraq War, if you were against the Iraq War, you're more likely to be a Democrat. And so, the idea but of course, it didn't make libertarians Democrats, right? That's totally ridiculous. Libertarians are just anti-war. So when there was a Democrat president, libertarians were also anti-war. And that's certainly, it doesn't make libertarians Republicans, depending on who's in the White House, or Democrats. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's and I think that there are plenty of people who are looking for that other alternative, interested in people who are not Republicans or Democrats, and they're looking for something different. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yes, we hear that a lot, especially Vic, your anti-ICE position, which I share. It's just not on my platform because I can't really do anything about it if I get into the assembly. But I am also anti-ICE, and people automatically say, "Oh, you're a Democrat," right? Because you have to be a Democrat if you're anti-ICE, and that is propaganda. That is people being trained by the media and by their parties to think that anyone who's against XYZ is the enemy, which is the Democrats, if you're a Republican, and Democrats want to destroy the country, and all of them are bad, and whatever. They train you to say that, just like if you are. I'm trying to think of something that a time where when a Democrat came up to me and called me a conservative, which happens all the time. I've been called a liberal, a conservative, a fascist, this or that, or like my non-interventionist stance is principled, which means when it comes to war, I don't think the U.S. should intervene in any country, no matter how I personally feel about whose side I'm on. For example, the Ukraine Russia uh, conflict, people thought that my non-interventionist stance made me a fascist and made me pro-Russia, but I'm not. I just don't think the U.S. should be involved. And the same thing with Israel and Palestine. I don't think we should be involved at all. It doesn't mean that I want everyone on any side to die or anything like that. I am a non-interventionalist, period. And so there's always this like people try to pigeonhole you into something that they recognize, which they learn from propaganda. And when they can't, they absolutely don't want to hear what you have to say, which is why one of the questions you should ask a candidate when you're trying to kind of figure out who you support is, where do your positions come from? What is the principle or philosophy that all of your positions come from? And if they don't really have an answer, it means that their positions are not coming from an internal philosophy or an internal compass, but it's coming from somebody who's puppeteering them usually.
Right.
But a
No,
libertarian will always be able to tell you that it comes from a non-aggression principle or it comes from individual liberty or what, like those are where all of our positions come from.
right, no, Lana, I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. Like my position, immigration, I had the same position during the Biden administration. So it's not like, would that made me a Republican because they disagree with the Biden's position on immigration? And, now that there is a Republican president, does that make me a Democrat because I disagree with the president's position? And, but it just doesn't make any sense. Of course, the reality is that on a lot of these policies, because these presidents have had similar policies, libertarians, of course, have consistent positions on all these policies that come from, whether it's natural rights or, not the non-aggression principle. So this is why I understand why some people may be confused because, if you look at, for example, major news networks, it's all kind of whenever you had, even going back to the, 90s and 80s in television, it's all like two sides, right? And it's kind of one is supposed to represent the right and the other one's supposed to represent the left. And then they argue with each other, going back to the 1990s and the Crossfire show on CNN and everything that followed from after that, from Fox News to MSNBC to CNN. And so if you're like a libertarian, that doesn't really fit, it doesn't really fit in any of those. And it's like, and I think people, when they watch these networks and they may get confused as how can one be, against this position, but then another position seem to agree with, a few positions agree with the other side, and how does that all work? But I think the point is that, as you said, that other, people who are Republicans and Democrats, they, they don't come from the same. I mean, most of them don't come from the same kind of original kind of a philosophy that certainly we come from, right? The conservatives, they're, Burke and conservatives, Burke. You look at Burke and you look at John Locke. They don't come from the same from the same point from the same sort of origin, right? They come from different sides. So I think this is something that what some people do, even when they disagree with us, what they do find appealing about libertarians is that we have a consistent philosophy, and like most of our stances do come from that philosophy. It's the consistent application of our philosophy to policy, right? And that is something that even people who disagree with us I'm sure they do find, that's something they can respect.
Yes, absolutely. And real quick, because we got a few more followers on TikTok, we are live on pretty much every platform, YouTube, X, Facebook, and Vic and I are simultaneously live on our own TikTok accounts. So you can request to be a guest on TikTok. I can put you on the StreamYard, just requires you giving me your email and stuff. But if you have a question for us, you can put it in the comments and we'll get to it. Usually we have some pretty good conversations because of people who put questions. So please put your questions in there. And to add a little bit more, they go so far to try to discourage anything different or new in politics that I was actually just reminded of this. Well, the other day someone saw one of our live streams and commented, is she a liberal pretending to be a libertarian? Because apparently I look like one. Maybe it's because I have it like more of an alt aesthetic, which is, I guess, automatically liberal or leftist. And the thing is that it doesn't actually matter what I look like. It doesn't matter what Vic looks like. It doesn't matter what any of the candidates look like. If you have trouble, with the way what we look like, close your eyes and listen to what we're saying, right? Instead. But I was just reminded that during when Obama was president, and I'm not a fan of Obama, but when he was president, he wore a tan suit. Do you remember that? And they made this huge deal about him wearing a tan suit because it didn't look presidential. Well, what does a president look like, first of all? Because look at our president now, right? But they don't want anything different inside the system, because once that happens, then they lose power, then they lose influence, then they lose the control that they have over the population, because now there's something unpredictable in the system.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's, I totally agree. Kind of reminds me when, and then I can give plenty of examples whenever historically, somebody was getting a little too popular. That's when, that's when you would see kind of the Republicans and Democrats go full force. In 1998, Jesse Ventura ran outside of the two-party system and went as a reform party candidate for governor of Minnesota, got elected, and that has visibly did make powers that be afraid. And so the idea was not to allow anyone who's we can't allow anyone who's outside of the two-party system get elected governor. Somebody who's running on a third-party ticket, and and we definitely could see that after that happened, after he served one term. Whenever you had a candidate for governor in whether it was in not just in New Jersey, Massachusetts, or if it's in New Jersey, you would have one of the major parties spending a lot of money, millions of dollars, trying to run ads against that person. So this is and that just shows that they're afraid, that they don't want anyone to kind of gain traction. And we saw this, of course, in New Jersey, when independent candidate Chris Daggett was running for governor, and the Republican, the RNC, spent a whole lot of money just combining running one ad, both against the incumbent Democratic governor John Corzine and Chris Daggett, the independent candidate, because the reality was Chris Daggett's campaign just had no money to respond to these attack ads. And so yes, the RSNDs, they don't want anyone to to get elected who's not a Republican or a Democrat. And I don't mean that somebody who's not like leaning one way or another. If somebody who's like truly independent, that's not something that they want to see.
Yeah, and to Robert's comment about libertarians being classical liberals, that is true. Unfortunately, people don't know what that means when you say classical liberal, unless you're someone who has studied philosophy or has any sort of surface knowledge on it. They don't know how to differentiate between the different categories. And when you say classical liberal, all they hear is liberal, and what they associate that is with the negative connotation of the label of liberal nowadays, which I guess basically means leftist, maybe even leftist anarchist. Maybe I think people just say things, just like people throw the National Socialist. I don't know if I can say that on TikTok. So the National Socialist word around. They throw the word around fascist. So they just throw these words around as insults, but they don't actually know what they mean. Half the time, people don't even know what libertarians are, and that's fine. I absolutely do not mind educating people on the libertarian philosophy and all these things. It's when they use it as an insult to shut you down immediately without even giving you a chance. And they do that with me a lot with my appearance, the fact that I'm younger, I'm in my 30s, the fact that I'm a woman, the fact that I have the aesthetic choice that I have. But people do it with lots of things. If you're overweight, if you're too old, if you're this or that, if you're a minority, if you're clearly an immigrant, whatever. Um, so, yeah, I just wish people would take politics. I don't want to say more seriously because people take it very seriously. I just wish that they would treat it kind of like anything else that they are supporting in their life, and actually look at options and demand options to choose from, which is why what happened to Lily is very upsetting.
I totally agree. Yeah, thank you, absolutely. And Lana, and the reality, of course, is that yeah, people give, like you say, people can call themselves classical liberals. Of course, that might be confusing for a whole bunch of people because the definition, people might confuse the classic liberals with liberals, and but I don't even know, frankly, what like a lot of some of these terms. I think they're entirely meaningless. In 2025. Because I mean, what do they even mean? I mean, is someone who's a conservative, does that mean that one supports, President Trump's when it comes to the federal government having a 10% stake in Intel? I mean, is that a conservative position, or is a conservative position where someone opposes that? Is the conservative position someone who wants 600,000 students, college students, to come from China, or is a conservative position someone who opposes that? I mean, I think a lot of these things sort of become confusing because I don't think I even understand what some of these terms mean in this day and age. I think I know what the term libertarian means. I think I know what the, but some of these other terms, frankly, they do leave me baffled. I guess some of the if one is a conservative, I guess it depends what the current position of the Trump administration is, but it might be but tomorrow it might be a different position. So what does that even mean, right?
So we did have a comment, or I have a comment on TikTok, because we both have different TikTok lives. And in my background, I have abolish ICE and repeal income tax, just so it's the background. And someone says, so abolish the police as well, because ICE does nothing cops don't do to Americans every day. And just real quick, I'm also not a huge fan of the way cops interact. If you follow me in my personal life, I have poor interactions with the police on a regular basis. I think there needs to be serious police reform, but that's a whole different subject. But the reason why they're separated is because ICE is actually, its existence is unconstitutional. And Vic, if you want to give your spiel about ICE.
Sure. Yeah. No. And by the way, my position about ICE, I've had that since I don't know, like the 2 decades. I mean, it's not in the Constitution. So, I mean, Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, when it says Congress shall, and it lists the powers of the federal government, it does not include the word immigration, only naturalization, which is citizenship. So, and ICE, so the point is that, well, the powers not granted to the federal government are to be given to the states and the people. That's the 10th Amendment. So, people say, well, what about invasion? Of course, that's invasion. By invasion, clearly it was meant military invasion. And of course, immigrants are not invaders in a sense that, if they are, then, our ancestors, people who were born here, but their ancestors have come from other countries, that means that they were invaders, which is ridiculous. That means they should not have come to the United States, and means you should not have been born in the U.S. That doesn't make sense. So the point is that the federal government wasn't really involved in immigration until the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the purpose was, of course, to prevent people from coming from China to the U.S. And that's when the Supreme Court got involved and said that yes, they do see a power, even though they said we cannot find it in the Constitution specifically. They still want the federal government to have that power to restrict immigration. But the reality, of course, is that if you look at the Declaration of Independence, one of the reasons for the Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances with the king, was restricting the ability of the people from Europe to, well, come to the colonies. And they wanted the federal government to have nothing to do with restricting immigration. That's why it's not in the Constitution. And it would not have made sense either way, because they wanted the people who live in the 13 states to grow in number. Why would they want the federal government, if you think about it logically, to prevent that from happening? They didn't want the population to grow. No, they wanted to have more people. That's what they were talking about. So So for all these reasons, right? For all these reasons, yeah, the federal government has just no federal jurisdiction over immigration. And the argument that I've been making, they made a total mess out of the immigration system because, of course, by even though they have got rid of the quotas, right, the number of people they're supposed to come from certain parts of the world during the Lyndon Johnson administration, they have made it more difficult to legally come to the U.S. because the only way you can come legally is through the restricted work visas and through the through family members, right? So that is, they made it highly restrictive, right? So limiting the number of people who could come to the U.S. legally to about 600,000 per year. I guess that's about the number, and that is highly restrictive when it comes to work visas specifically, because and that explains why 42% of the farm workers are undocumented immigrants. So by making it so difficult to legally come and work in the U.S., they have encouraged undocumented immigration. They want to call it illegal, fine, but these are the policies that the people that are calling for deportations have supported and are supporting. And this specifically regarding the Bill Clinton, when he was president, he signed the legislation to restrict undocumented immigrants and more by preventing them from getting legalized through their employer and through their family members. And they just encouraged even more undocumented immigrants to stay. And after 1996, you see a significant increase in the number of undocumented immigrants, precisely of the policies that the people that are currently calling for deportations have been supporting and are supporting. So the policies that they're supporting have led to having more undocumented immigrants. And of course, now they're saying, and before they're saying, well, let's just deport them. But the only reason they're here is because of the policies that you support. And that is, the irony is, I guess they, but you would think that, of course, since they have created this quote unquote problem, I mean, they must see it as a problem, that you would think that they would try to fix it. But no, they don't, because they do not want more immigrants. Not, they want specific immigrants from specific places, those that have, those, in the tech industry, right? You can see that, but they don't want other people who don't have those skills, which is pretty discriminatory. So my position is, look, it's not in the Constitution. It's not even that. I support natural rights, the rights to life, liberty, and property. That's where the rights come from. The rights do not come from the Constitution. We're born with these rights, right? People talking about the flag burning, the reality is that, look, the Bill of Rights, if you look at the Bill of Rights, what it says Congress shall have, right? It talks about what the rights that the government cannot take away from us, the state cannot take away from us, meaning that we already have those rights by definition, right? They're not granted to us by the Constitution because it says that the state, right, cannot take away those rights, and that's important. Now, my view on immigration is that, look, if there are background checks, people should be able, once they pass those background checks, to come and live in New Jersey. That's my position on immigration. If they have not committed any kind of violent crimes, their background checks come in, and it wouldn't take a long time for that to go through. They should be allowed to work, just like people who were able to come to work, about 120 years ago, before the Immigration Act of 1924, that placed high restrictions on the ability of people to come to the United States. That put an end to immigration to the U.S. in 1924. And after that, during the Holocaust, of course, the Anne Frank family was prohibited, was not allowed to come to the United States, even though they tried. So Anne Frank was certainly killed by the Nazis, but the reality is that she was also a victim of the federal government's restrictive immigration policy. So if you're trying to come to work in New Jersey, want to come through, with your family, once those background checks go through, I believe you should be allowed to work. So to come to New Jersey and work. So that's my position on immigration.
So I want to address some of the comments in my TikTok, but first, aside from the constitutionality of your position, Vic, libertarians believe that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and also freedom of association, and you can't have either of those things if those two things aren't existing at the same time. If you don't have freedom of movement, you cannot be free to associate with who you want to associate with, and vice versa. So that's, we were talking about where libertarian stances come from, where they don't come from media or propaganda or what the current theme of politics is, or how to get votes. Just, that's not where our positions come from. They come from the platform, which comes from the libertarian philosophy, and people have, by virtue of being a human being, the freedom of movement. So this person says there's a lot of things that aren't in the Constitution. We should have an enforcement agency. I agree that there are lots of things that Congress does and the federal government does that aren't in the Constitution because they're doing it without authority of the Constitution, and all those things should immediately stop. And that includes the control over immigration. Like you said, Vic, the only authority the federal government has over immigration is naturalization, which means they only have the authority to grant citizenship, but they don't have the authority to actually restrict immigration or control the flow of how many people come in and out. We don't actually need the federal government for very many things, which is why I don't think it should exist at all, really, except for maybe the military, and even that I question. What would happen is the states that have a lot of immigrants coming through, like the New York, New Jersey border, like they did 100 years ago, or even the Texas or lower California border, those states would be in charge. And as far as enforcement, I'm not sure as far as immigration what they would be enforcing, because again, the federal government can only grant citizenship. So if you mean by enforcement, like coming over the border illegally, well, then the states would have their own police force if, people are just like not, breaking through checkpoints or whatever the case may be. And as far as immigrants coming here, it's very important to understand that they have used the term invasion very, very deliberately, because that is a word that's used in the Constitution. And because they're labeling immigrants from cultures that are maybe not prominent in our country, they're labeling them as invaders. They're going to come here and change the American culture and assault your children and steal and bring drugs over here. They're invading the country. They've used that word very deliberately, and they're using the same tactics that they did when the Italians and the Irish came over here. They would say horrible things about them, and now 100 years later, they have built this northeastern area of the country, and they're welcome here, and their culture has kind of weaved into American culture. So this is nothing new. It's a lot of people say, well, it's different because these cultures, like Muslim culture, for example, or the Islam religion, has it in their principles to invade other countries and take over. Okay. We can argue about whether that's true or not, but they've been saying that about many different religions and many different cultures for a very long time. I would say the Amish, which are a Christian sect up here, absolutely, have taken over. You can't go, at least where I am, you can't go 20, 30 minutes without running into an Amish store, and their carts and their culture and their things are very, very prominent and very, very tangible. And I'm fine with it. It's fine. It's okay. Got another comment here.
Yeah, and you don't have to shop at the Amish store if you don't want to. That's the beauty of it. I mean, somebody like me who always has had an interest in other cultures. I think that's a great thing. I'd love to go to a store, and I went to an African. So this the stories that there was I thought it was going to be an Indian restaurant, and that was closed. And so, but then I saw right next to it is an African store. So I figured, why don't I check it out? Learn more things. And I always had a curious mind and always wanted to learn about other cultures. So I bought myself some fufu and some other foods. And you know what? That was great. The lady came in just to try to start explaining the things. I thought that was great. And look, our culture, our society is richer because of immigration. And that goes back, whether it's 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Look, who doesn't like pizza? Where do you think that came from? From immigrants, of course.
Yeah. So this person says, I really liked Bernie when he was a national socialist, and now he's open borders, so a vote R. That's clearly a troll comment, but I just want to mention that socialists are usually not usually. Every instance of a socialist state has been closed borders, to the point where there are instances in history of Eastern Europe shooting people who were at the border. That's how close border they were, because a socialist state, a centralized state, cannot exist with a free flow of immigration. So it's actually the socialist position to be closed border.
Well, no, I think that to some, I mean, if you look at certainly the positions from the unions years ago, they wanted, of course, restrictions on immigration, in past, certainly, past decades. So that's not an unusual position. But I certainly wouldn't, when it comes to communist governments, yes, they certainly don't want to, the Soviet government definitely had closed borders. Certainly the North Korean government has closed borders. That's without, without a doubt. And that's totally understandable, but of course, because they're not interested in not just people, people leaving, of course. The reason why the Berlin Wall was built is to prevent people from leaving, and because of course the government, the economy was so inferior, but also they don't want other people to come in and to travel to other places, because of course then people would see that there's life is better in other countries, because once you just quickly give an example of the Soviet Union. Once people start traveling at the end, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, to other places and start coming back, they're saying, wait a minute, in other places, like you have more than one kind of cheese, and people don't stay in line for bread for hours, and it's like, oh wow. So it's understandable why, for example, communist governments, when they did exist, and certainly in the case of North Korea today, they don't want people to travel to other countries back and forth and see what life is like in other places, because may God forbid they would want to have anything similar in their own country.
So this, on my TikTok, someone says that I agree with libertarians on basically it scrolled up, it scrolled away. So I don't know exactly what they said, but I agree with libertarians on most things except for immigration. Now, I understand that people have hard lines with certain positions. Immigration is one of those things. Abortion is one of those things for a lot of people. There's these really hot topics that people just like have hard lines about. But when it comes to who you're going to vote for, there's very little chance that you're going to agree with a candidate 100% of the time with everything that they say. You just have to pick the person that represents probably the majority of your positions. But what you have to think about is, in your state or in your city or in your country, in the case of like presidential elections, how have you been voting the last previous years? Most people can go back and say, I've voted Republican, I voted Democrat, or whatever, I voted Green, Libertarian. And has those candidates actually positively affected your community, or have they raised the debt and continued wars and all these things that negatively impact our daily lives? And are you prepared to start voting for something different to get different results? But you don't have to agree with libertarians on everything to vote for one. And you also don't have to agree with everything on the libertarian platform to even be a member. I always go with the 80-20 rule, where if you agree with the libertarian platform, 80% of the libertarian platform, you can call yourself a libertarian. Libertarians argue about which things you should be 80% about, but that's a whole different discussion.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, there's no, and how many of those people agree with everything with the Republicans or Democrats? They still vote for them. I mean, I actually, what I have discovered in a lot of cases, throughout surveys that were taken in the past, a lot of the voters that vote for the candidates that they support don't agree with them on a lot of issues, and that they even make sometimes some of the voters, they make wrong assumptions about the stances of the candidates themselves. I mean, going back, I remember looking at 2000 when John McCain ran in the Republican primary for president. When the polls were taken, it seems like a lot of voters actually thought he was pro-choice. Speaking of abortion, when he was in reality pro-life, that was his position. So I think that sometimes you have individuals assuming certain things about candidates when they're not really reflected, when it comes to their stances. So certainly, I guess my only advice would be to definitely, learn about the candidates that you're considering to support. But you're never going to have 100% agreement, and like I said earlier, a lot of people who vote Republican or Democrat don't even have 100% agreement for the Republicans and Democrats they support. So just saying.
So I want to highlight Robert's question here. How do we know for sure that people being detained, jailed, or deported are truly illegal? From what I understand, there's no due process. Yes, that's actually a problem in general, not just with ICE and immigration. Somebody had mentioned police, like if we're anti-ICE, shouldn't we be anti-police? Well, that's a big issue I have with police. Of course, every community is different, but where I live in New Jersey, cops tend to arrest first and ask questions later. This has happened to many people, including myself. And ICE does the same thing. They will profile somebody based on their skin color or their accent or just a feeling, and then they'll arrest them and then figure it out later. And a lot of time, I mean, and that is kidnapping, just like when a cop arrests you without really having a reason. For example, there's a term or a law in New Jersey that a police officer can arrest you for disorderly conduct. I think this exists in most states, but I'm not sure if it's in all 50 states. And basically, if you look up that law, disorderly conduct can be as little as cursing in public, which is an infringement of the First Amendment, first of all. But that basically means they can arrest you for any reason. And they do use that law to arrest people, basically for giving them an attitude or for cursing in public or for whatever they subjectively deem as conducting disorderly, I guess. And then, you sort it out later. You hire a lawyer and figure it out later. And that is a huge problem. And this person also says that it's best that ICE handles illegals and don't leave it up to the American public. So I don't know why there's this attitude that like police officers or ICE officers are not the American public, but they are just normal people. And a lot of times they don't even have a whole lot of training. They are acting as arms of the state, but they are just normal people that are fallible. And they do make mistakes all of the time. And we can see examples of ICE arresting American citizens simply because they didn't speak English very well, or using the fact that they couldn't produce documentation of their citizenship like on their person immediately as an excuse to arrest them. And we have real life examples of this happening just in the last couple of months. The federal government should not be in charge of something that should be handled locally.
Lana, thank you for that. Yeah, I totally agree. And looking at the ICE's numbers themselves, 2/3 of the people that have been arrested by ICE, according to ICE itself, have not committed any crimes at all. And the 93%, I believe, they have not committed any violent crimes, like 94%. So the point is that people say, oh, when Obama was president, he deported more people. But the difference is that during the Obama administration, the people they have deported were actually violent criminals, like people that committed murder, and they actually went after those people. Now, during the Trump administration, he's going after against for everybody, and even some girl came to the United States when she was 3 years old from Honduras. Spent most of her life in the United States, went to college, wants to become a nurse. Like, well, that's too bad. Your life is not. What the federal government is saying is not, no, you're not important to society because your parents did not bring you here to the U.S. when you were a child. You're undocumented, therefore you should not be in the United States. It doesn't matter. I mean, if she were to become a nurse, I'm sure they wouldn't care. I mean, they would deport the nurse. They went after police officers so much for supporting the police, as they say. We support the police. But the reality is that they just do not view people who are here. They don't really care about what contributions they claim that you should contribute to society. They don't believe that they're worth any of that. They do not view them as individuals with equal rights because they don't really care about anything. They don't care about the fact that we have individuals who are helping to put food on our tables. I don't care about any of that. Food prices went up. They don't care. Is that a consequences of these policies? Of course it is, right? We had prices on vegetables go up to 39%. So that and plus tariffs, of course, which I understand that the appeals court has today declared them unconstitutional. So it looks like this is going to be go all the way to the Supreme Court. Clearly, under the U.S. Constitution, the president doesn't have the power to impose single-handedly tariffs. That's a power that's reserved to Congress, and certainly under the emergency that President Trump has invoked, even under that law, he has no power to impose tariffs. So the law that he used to impose tariffs, that does not allow the president to impose tariffs. So the appeals court, of course, ruled against him. But we'll see if this case will go all the way to the Supreme Court.
So we're going to go for about 10 or 15 more minutes. So if you're just joining us, feel free to leave a comment or question. It doesn't have to be about what we're talking about currently, which is ICE and tariffs and other things. It can be about anything if you just have a random question. I do want to address a question that was actually asked a really long time ago that I didn't get to, and that is, if you do not win this year's election, would you run for Congress in 2026? I'll answer that question after you, Vic, if you want to answer, because I don't know who it was for, but we can both answer it.
I mean, I haven't thought about it, so that's next year. So I really haven't thought about it. That's the answer. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Running for office is exhausting, and I've done it 3 times in a row. On top of also my job being helping the current candidates, it's very exhausting. But I wouldn't be opposed to running for Congress for a second time. And speaking of the way the two-party system kind of discourages people from running for office, another stigma that you can get as a candidate, that if you run too many times and don't win, suddenly you're a throwaway candidate, don't take you seriously. And that's given all the things that we have talked about today or talked about in other live streams or videos about how hard it is for especially in New Jersey, since third parties don't get ballot access, they don't get invited to debates, they don't get access to public funds, they don't get media attention, like they purposely ignore third party candidates. A newspaper or media source in my area wrote this really long article about the Democrat and Republican candidates. And at the end, they said, oh, also there's an independent candidate, Lana Leguía, who's running in District 24. And they do that with you, Vic. A lot of the times they'll have these long articles about the Democrat and Republican candidate. And then at the end, they'll say, oh, and there's also 2 independent candidates named blah, blah, blah. Right? Like the media does not give us the same attention on purpose. We don't get access to public funds, but I don't think any candidate should have access to public funds. Actually, taxpayers should not be funding political campaigns. And we don't get invited to debates. Vic cannot be invited into the debates until he raises $500,000, which is really hard to do. And this all perpetuates the cycle of us just not getting any traction. So independent candidates and third-party candidates have to run multiple times for people to even recognize their names after a while. But then you run too many times, and then now you're not a serious candidate because you run so many times and you haven't won, even though part of the reason, not the only reason, but a part of the reason is because they don't give third parties a true spotlight to begin with. But as I've said in previous live streams, that I do think running for office is an act of activism, no matter if you're a libertarian or whoever else, because it's really the only opportunity you have to talk about your platform. It kind of gives you an excuse to talk about the libertarian platform or your positions or your beliefs or your solutions to the issues. And people want to hear from you because you're a political candidate and you're going to be on their ballot. So it's the perfect way to educate people about your solutions to the issues and about your party's platform, in this case, libertarianism. So that's what keeps me going, running every year. Year after year, even if I don't win. But I have to think about it because I'm getting tired, y'all. Like, between gathering signatures and door knocking and dealing with, media bias and all these barriers on top of just the basics of running for office, on top of money. Like, I'm not a millionaire. I'm one of the poor. So I don't have any money. I have to rely strictly on donations. I cannot use my own money because I don't have it. And that's a huge factor as well that people don't consider, is that we don't have access to millions of dollars from super PACs and et cetera that the Democrats and Republicans do. And that is a huge disadvantage. So I'd have to think about it, but I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I haven't thought about it. I'm just sort of thinking about this year, what might happen in the future. There's a question of, I don't know, should any chance it could run under the Democrats, and if not, what are the hurdles?
So the reason, sorry, if you want to answer that, you can.
No, I mean, I think that in order to run under another party platform, I mean, I would think that I would think that one would have to, have some kind of, I guess, agreement with that party, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. I mean, there's a reason why libertarians are not Republicans or Democrats, because we don't agree with the positions of the Republicans or Democrats. So why run? And the other part of this, as time and time again, has demonstrated. The reality, of course, is that if let's say you are elected, then of course, then you would have to then support all the people and all the positions that you don't support in. And of course, so you either have to lie in order to get elected, or, which is something I have no desire doing, right? Because then people would realize that I'm lying. So people either would not support him because I'm lying, or they would not. But then if I were to lie and somehow get away with it, then I would basically have to just, expose myself as a liar after getting elected. Like, that just wouldn't make any sense. I mean, that's just the first things that come to my mind.
Yes. I completely agree with you. Those are the reasons why I wouldn't do it. For example, I could probably run as a Republican in my area and probably win. Because my area is very, very Republican. But I don't, because I'm not one. If I was a Republican, I'd join the Republican Party and vote Republican and ask for endorsement from the Republican Party. But I'm not one. I'm a Libertarian. Hold on, my TikTok is asking me to prove I'm a human. So, like you said, if I were to run for the Republicans or Democrats, I would have to either just hide or hide my positions or lie. And it would be hard to lie because now we've run as Libertarians and our positions are just out there, right? So like if I ran as Republican, being anti-ICE and not a fan of the police, I think police are road fires essentially. That would be something I would have to backpedal on, and I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to run as a Republican or Democrat because I'm not one, and I'm not willing to lie or hide my positions or hide what I'm passionate about or what I think is correct. Because to me, like I said before, running as a Libertarian is not about necessarily winning. Of course I want to win. I want all the Libertarians across the nation to win. That's what I want for you guys and for myself. But it's more about spreading the philosophy and educating people about the platform and such. That's a priority of mine. And also educating people about the political process, because as I'm running for office, I'm learning more and more about how corrupt it is and how many barriers there are really to running for office, which discourages people who don't have money or third-party candidates or just good people who don't want to play dirty. It discourages them from running. And I'm learning more and more about that. And so I want to educate people about that as well. So that's why I would not run as a Democrat or a Republican. Right. Even though I might have won if I ran as a Republican, I don't know. But at this point, I don't think they would endorse me because of my very public positions about ICE and such. So
and right, absolutely. And the history of this is that whenever someone, like you mentioned, running as a Republican, so of course then for a position that you have no chance of winning, they might say, okay, we don't really care. That's sacrificial lamb. And of course, for a position that you could actually win, they would actually not help you one bit. And that has been the history. So it's not somebody who's running. Actually, the case of Andy Horning comes to mind, who's a Libertarian candidate in Indiana. So he ran as a Libertarian. And then he ran for a congressional seat in Indiana. So well, I'll run as a Republican. Let's see, I'm actually get elected. And actually in a close race. So what happened, the Republican Party did not want to have anything to do with him because they're like, we hate libertarians. We don't want libertarians. We want libertarians to vote for us. I'm sure Democrats, who wouldn't want libertarians to vote for them? But they did not want to give him a single penny. So the what ended up happening, he ended up losing because the Republicans did not want him to get elected. Even as a Republican, they did not want to see him in Congress. So that's what ended up happening. He lost the election because they did not want him there. I remember even with Ron Paul, he's a Republican, right? He elected as a Republican. Newt Gingrich actually supported the Democrat in that election in 1996. He did not want to see Ron Paul get elected to Congress. As when Newt Gingrich was, of course, the sort of a titular head of the Republican Party. So this is what happens. Somebody actually said this best. That back in I think it was 2004, that was a line, I forget who said it. This was regarding the Democratic Party. But back then, it's like the Democratic Party is where the progressivism goes to die, and that actually goes back to the time where the progressives were not wanted in the Democratic Party at all. And of course, the example of Dennis Kucinich was used to lure people to say, well, that's why you should vote Democrat. It's because of Dennis Kucinich. But he was only one person. And many times you would see Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul being the only members of Congress voting for against a specific type of legislation. So that's certainly how I see it.
So to respond to the comment about if Vic ran for office as a Democrat, would we not still support him? The thing is that for Vic to run as a Democrat, he would have to change his platform to a platform that is not libertarian anymore. And we see that a lot when people switch parties, is that we saw that last year, the presidential election with Kennedy and all these people like switching over and asking favors and all this stuff. They have to change their positions to something that's not what it originally was. And Vic, your position on the free market, your position on war, your position on sending aid to Israel, Ukraine, like those would not fly in the Democratic Party, at least in New Jersey. Your position on guns, for example, would absolutely not fly in New Jersey. And your position on public education would not fly in the Democratic Party, and you would have to change all of those things, which would then make your platform not libertarian. So as a libertarian, why would you vote for Vic as a Democrat candidate when his platform is no longer libertarian? But if you somehow encounter a candidate that is with the two parties or even the Green Party or whatever that is mostly a libertarian platform, I'm not sure how that would happen, but I'm sure it does exist or has existed in the past. And sure, vote for that person. I'm not saying that you have to be absolutely loyal to a party, but the chances of a candidate having a libertarian platform while being officially endorsed by a party that is not the Libertarian Party is very unlikely. He might, ask for the nomination, and he probably wouldn't get it if he kept his libertarian platform. So I just don't think that would probably happen. But if it magically did, I mean, sure, vote for Vic.
Yeah, right. Then no, absolutely. And if I should just add one more thing to that, Lana, thank you for that. And it's also the case that the reality is that the voters themselves, I mean, would not accept some, like if I did run on what I believe in, then either the Democratic or the Republican Party. I mean, most of the voters would not support me, and that's pretty obvious. And so, what would be the point? People say like running as a libertarian, or you just why don't you join Republicans or Democrats? But if I did, then those people wouldn't, those voters wouldn't support me either because they would not find my positions to be in line with what they believe in. So, while I could certainly, sure. And this is what we have seen in the past. People that had run as sort of Democrats, and certainly seen that people, for example, who ran as Libertarian, then ran as Democrats, they wouldn't be getting any higher support among the in the Democratic primary than they did running as Libertarians. I mean, I have seen that happen, and they're not, voters don't all of a sudden say, oh, wow, it's like, I'm a Democrat and I agree with everything this person says. No, they just doesn't. And I'm a Republican. No, I can't support that. That's something I believe in. So what ends up happening is that these libertarians who run as Republicans and Democrats, in many of these cases, don't end up getting any type of significant support when they run as Republicans or Democrats.
Also, you have to consider the game that is politics. Unfortunately, I'm not saying it's like a positive thing or that it actually exists, but say Vic or I run as Democrats, or in my area, I would have to run as a Republican to win because it's basically a Republican city over here, and we make it to the state assembly. We have to also vote in line with our parties, and we don't have to. It's not like we're held at gunpoint, but politicians. Representatives are pressured to vote a certain way, or they won't get help for their reelection, or they won't get funding, or they'll start getting negative media attention, like what happened with Thomas Massey, right? He started voting as a libertarian, and it made the Republican Party mad, and now they're going on the attack, and they probably won't help with his reelection. And so there's a lot of pressure with these moving parts in the background, this chess game that's happening in the background, that when you're actually a libertarian or a green or a socialist or whatever, but you're running on a two-party system, you're going to have to vote and act like you're part of that party. So I don't see the incentive of doing that at all from the get-go.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Lana, 100%. And yeah, because now, like, okay, then you do get elected. Now you have to support everyone else. Let's say it's for something like township, council and whatnot. Then you don't agree with all the Democrats and the Republicans, and then of course, what's next? I guess you can have a. I'm sure there would be, and we have seen this in other states where, there certain individuals, they start saying that well then it should be a recall, right? We should recall
Hmm.
the person, but that's when a person gets elected as known libertarian. But of course, if you do get elected as a Republican Democrat, then you are, as you said, expect to support everything they're doing, and then if you don't, then you become their enemy. And yeah, like just the point is that the best thing to do is just be yourself, be a libertarian, run as a libertarian. That way you don't have to sell yourself out. I mean, that has been really the issue with the people have found, for example, within the Democratic Party, is that you have people running as progressives, get elected, and then the next thing they do is that well they have to do whatever the establishment wants them to do, and now they voted a different way, not the way they promised, and now they and pretty soon and of course they get all the seats in different committees and all that in for the support of the establishment. You certainly see that that's something more known on the federal level, right? This is what happened to Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, right? She ran as one thing, and as soon as she got elected, she had to
Hmm.
go. She went along with Nancy Pelosi, right? And so
Bernie too. They're both
Bernie said,
considered
yeah, Bernie too.
yeah, they're considered to be traitors to their cause or whatever. So
Bernie Sanders was great, but Bernie Sanders, when he decided to caucus, I would argue that in 1990, when he was elected to Congress, because he had a lot of good positions before. I must say that a number of positions I actually agree with, but when he got elected to Congress, he the agreement was that he would basically, be in coalition with the Democrats, and for that, the Democrats will not run candidates against him, and that's what ended up happening. So he basically decided to adopt the establishment Democratic Party's line on a whole lot of different topics, to a point where, for example, he supported the bombing of Serbia, and this is what happened where one of his staff members quit in protest. And so Bernie Sanders has a number of these topics. I wish he was actually a progressive because I would have agreed with him on all these different topics. But unfortunately, yeah, it has been a disappointment. I really wish he was true to his causes that he claimed to support. And when you look at his younger days, when he was the mayor of Burlington, and when he would run for as a candidate of the Liberty Union, right? It's kind of a local. I understand it's called something else right now, I believe, in Vermont. He held a number of positions that he was true to what he believed in, and he seemed to change his position on a whole bunch of these different topics. I mean, as soon as he got elected to Congress, and that was the price that he paid for pretty much deciding to support the establishment of the Democratic Party, so they wouldn't run Democratic candidates in all the different races that he ran in. So yes, Bernie Sanders certainly has been a disappointment, and of course he ended up backing Hillary Clinton. We know what happened, and he pretty much backs all these other different establishment Democrats. So I have a lot more respect with people like Ron Paul, who refused in 2012 to back Mitt Romney, and he certainly refused to back John McCain in 2008. Those are the people I have more respect for, not the people that end up backing people that they claim to staunchly disagree on some important issues.
yeah, exactly. And I don't think either one of us are sellouts. Our positions are principled, and they come from the same source. And year after year, every time we run for office, our positions are the same, relevant to the position that we're running for. And if I make it to the assembly or to Congress or some other seat, they're not going to change according to who's asking for a favor. I understand that politics is a chess game, but also I'm running on a principled platform. Why would I change the second I get into office? I'm not afraid of not getting reelected because I'm not interested in power or the money that comes with being an elected official. I'm there to try and make things more free. So why would I?
Right. Yeah. Like if I were elected, let's say, if I ran as, let's say, for assembly, and I, the Democrat, and let's say someone got elected by lying and not, hiding my position, which would not, because, like I said originally, I wouldn't have support with Democratic Party or the Republican Party with all the positions I have, then yeah, then I would be expected to back the Republican nominee for governor or back a Republican governor. If I were elected as a Democrat, then I would be expected to back a Democrat. And if I didn't, then I would be disloyal and I would be a horrible, horrible person. Like none of this would actually ever make sense for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we went a little bit over an hour. I don't see any more questions. Oh, actually, I am incorrect. There are comments on my TikTok. Come on, 1 second. When can we abolish this stupidity on the left? He's mad about our position on ICE. And this is actually a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, that because we have certain positions that align with whatever the media has pigeonholed certain positions to certain people, you know, we're leftists now because we want to abolish ICE, or we're fascists because, you know, we think education should be private, or that everyone should be able to have the right to have firearms, or fascists, or whatever the stupid things that people say that are incorrect. But there are a lot of people who don't support ICE and don't support the federal government being involved in immigration that aren't leftists, and libertarians are one of them. But anyways, that is the comments that I got on TikTok, but we're going to end it there. Vic and I are going to go live again. The candidate live streams happen every Thursday at 6:30. It happened today at Friday because we had to postpone it, but it's usually Thursdays at 6:30. We go live with all the candidates. Unfortunately, Dustin and Bruno couldn't make it today either. Hopefully they'll be here next week. And then Vic and I also do our own live stream most days at 7 p.m. from all of our platforms, but you'll see it pop up on your feed when we go live. And we'll see you next time.
A pleasure.